Welcome to a new video. Let's take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. The first story is called, Don't Do Things That Are Not Your Job. For about 3 years, I worked at a large chain store in the electronics department. It was my first job out of high school, and thanks to a combination of me being a tech nerd and a couple of very kind co-workers, I picked up on not only the job but our products quite easily. I knew what I was doing within the month, and before the year was over, I was a contender to take the department manager's position when he left. I ended up not getting the position, but that's a story for another time. Fast forward 2 years and the company restructures its stores. Basically, instead of working in a particular department, now you do one job across the entire store. So now you have people who specialized in, say, fashion forced to do price changes all over the store in departments they don't know. No one likes the changes, and over the next few months, over half the staff quits. Including the entire electronics team. Except me. I am now the only person in the entire store with the knowledge and experience to run electronics. Management included, as many of them were replaced during the restructuring. As one of our highest shrink and highest profit departments, they know they're done without me, so they bend over backward to make sure I stay on. If I'm at work, I'm in electronics, and if I want to do something, no one questions it. They know I'm the only one who knows what I'm doing. I'm the only person in the store with this privilege. Now, onto the malicious compliance. After about a year, my manager who worked out the deal with me to let me run electronics leaves, and a new manager from after the restructuring takeover. Technically, my job title is Customer Experience Specialist. Basically, all I'm supposed to do is customer service. Stock? Different team. Price changes? Layout changes? Different teams. Unofficially? I do it all for electronics because the few times other people did it, I spent my entire next shift cleaning up their mistakes. And I made sure management knew it. The new manager finds me rearranging a section one day, preparing for some new stock to come in with the release of a new iPhone. Cases for it and such. He throws a fit and tells me I'm not supposed to be doing that, it's not my job. At first, I try explaining why I'm taking care of it, but he doesn't want to listen. I kind of just ignore him, try to placate him until he wanders off, then goes back to my work. Apparently, he sees this because the next day he writes me up. Fine. Don't want me doing things beyond my job? So be it. I've been working here too long to care. For the next 3 weeks or so, I do nothing except customer service. No customers in the department? I'm stood behind the till being paid to do nothing. I watch as the shelves empty, with no one stocking them or correcting for the items getting stolen. Our backroom is overflowing with electronic stuff that can't go out because the new shelf layouts haven't been done. Everyone just thought I would do it. I didn't. A month goes by and management is freaking out, our profits are way down, the back room is a mess. The shelves are barren. What's going on? I'm sipping my drink, stood behind my till. Finally, they realize what happened. The manager that started it all is quietly shuffled into the back room and I get a new one, who tries to work out a new deal with me. The store-wide inventory is coming up in 2 months, and it's going to be a disaster. Unless I step in and save them. I hand in my 2 weeks' notice. I'd been applying for other jobs during my hiatus, and I got hired by a cell phone company. Who operates the cell phone kiosks. For my company. I request to be put in my store. The request is granted. Now here I am, watching from behind my kiosk as electronics goes down in flames. Profits are through the floor and the inventory check was the worst I had ever heard of. As a result, the store's budget is cut. I told them when I gave them my notice to have me train someone, but they didn't have the hours to spare. They really don't have the hours now. The next story is called, Complying with a Made-Up Policy. Both my wife and I share the same cellular account because of cheaper family plans. She's the primary line on the account, and thus has the final say on whatever happens on the account, and I'm merely an authorized user. I can do most things myself without her needing to be physically present. This happens when both of us decide to take a jaunt to the mall and I decide, after paying off a previous device on our account, to grab a tablet, seeing as I've been wanting one for a while. Now, most would assume in a lot of cases here that the husband is the person who's savvy and will shut a salesperson down and the wife is the person that could potentially be talked into whatever. At least, I think that's what the rep we dealt with us thought. Anyway, we roll into the carrier store. I tell them what I want, present my ID and they pull up the account. They haven't yet figured out that my wife is the woman that's with me and that's whose account we're dealing with. Before they roll off to the back to grab the tablet, the rep asks me if I want to add the upgrade plan or insurance to this purchase. I decline. I don't have a need for insurance on a tablet of all things. He runs off to the back, grabs the tablet, comes back and tries to sell me on the insurance again, plus accessories. I decline, again. This time, he cuts in with the, "Are you sure? It's a really good deal." "Yes. I'm sure. But you can upgrade every 3 months." "No, I'm fine." That's when a neighboring rep senses that he can maybe help his buddy sell, and starts reiterating that I really should buy the insurance. "No. How many times do I have to tell you?" After which the store manager notices, cuts in, and attempts to cancel the transaction unless I buy the insurance. Normally, I should have walked, but this was at a time where I only had my 2 feet to get me places, and this was the only store remotely close to me. I argued that they couldn't do that before the store manager looked at the account and noticed that this was my wife's account, not mine. Here's the malicious compliance bit. The manager and the rep came to the conclusion that my wife must be an idiot, and they could convince her to override my decision, because as per policy, the primary account holder has the final say, right? So, they demand to speak to my wife. She tells them no, I'm the one paying for this, and she's not getting involved. The store manager tries to say that my wife needs to finish the transaction for security purposes. I protest, but at this point, I'm just like, okay, you really want to speak to my wife and let her finish the transaction so badly? Fine. Have fun. I try to save you guys from getting screwed. I know that the account holder has to finish the transaction for security purposes is a made-up on-the-spot policy. But you know what? Fine. I'll roll with it. Because my wife is going to verbally kick you so hard you'll kiss the moon. She immediately flips the proverbial table in their faces, telling them that if they don't drop the predatory sales tactics, back off, and sell the tablet without insurance, to call care from their in-store phones, so she can cancel her account and switch to another provider, because she won't stand for being treated like this. Further, she'll be sending an email with every known executive email CC'd, detailing the horrible experience we had today. It doesn't sound like much when I type this, but trust me when I say that I can count on half a hand in my 6 years with this woman that I have ever heard her speak with such disgust and anger, but in a calm and collected manner. They immediately processed everything and apologized profusely, because they didn't anticipate that my wife works in sales and is very savvy to this type of tactics. They probably expected to have it easy once they got past me, but no. True to her word, she emailed corporate, and we got some huge bill credits for our trouble, and that store manager and rep were never seen again. Not sure if they got fired or shuffled off to another store, but we never saw them again at our local store. The last story is called, Absolutely No Overtime Without 48 Hours Advance Approval. This happened a long time ago. It was my first job after getting out of the military. The company I worked for was very, very cheap. They got all of their work by being the lowest bidder, and they did everything they could to pinch pennies. Most importantly, there was also a no overtime rule, which I quickly found out was strictly enforced. To be able to do any overtime, you had to get approval at least 48 hours in advance. If you got even 15 minutes of overtime, the smallest increment possible, they would make you take off 15 minutes early the very next day to make sure they didn't have to pay you an overtime. And, at the rates I was making in those days, 15 minutes equated to less than $2. In those few times, I didn't get clocked out in time, my boss would give me a lecture the next day. Then, he'd make me take off 15 minutes early to erase the overtime. Each time, he would ask me why and I would explain, which was always something understandable and justifiable. I'd still get the lecture about overtime requiring 48 hours of approval prior to the overtime and a warning that if I did it again, I just wouldn't get paid for it. Fine, I get it. You don't want me to get overtime. No problem. It also seemed to be lost on him that every time we had the conversation, it would take at least 30 minutes to talk about it, so the combined waste was a whole hour to talk about 15 minutes of excess time. One of my tasks was to take down the temperature of this one freezer they had. The thing was a huge walk-in freezer that contained a few $1,000s worth of inventory. The temperature was supposed to be under 32 degrees, but one day, I saw the temperature was over 40. So I wrote it down and called the supervisor up front. He told me not to worry about it, he'd get the night crew to take a look at it and that I should get out of there before I get overtime. The next day, I got a lecture from the boss about the 48-hour rule and was told not to do it again. So, that evening, when it was close to the time for me to leave, I checked that freezer again and its temperature is up in the 40s again. I write it down on the log and call up the maintenance team. No one answers. I look at the clock. It's time for me to start heading to the exit to clock out. I think about calling up that supervisor to tell him, but as far as I can tell, no one even looked at that freezer the night before. So, no one cares. If I reported it, I was going to be late and my boss was going to lecture me again, so okay. Here's your malicious compliance. I knew the potential damage, but I also knew I was going to get a lecture if I tried to do anything about it, so, have it your way. Don't want me to report it? Fine. I'm leaving for the night. The next morning, the boss calls me into his office. From there, I can see that freezer is open and they have a work crew emptying out the contents onto carts, which they're taking to the dumpster. Apparently, most everything was ruined. When I get in the boss's office, he looks mad. He's not the only one there, though. There's also the safety inspector, which I thought was odd because ordinarily if there was something like this, it would be the maintenance boss, but he was out that day. I would have preferred the maintenance boss. Talking to that guy was like talking to your grandpa. The safety inspector was a bit of a character, and as such, you never knew what he was going to say in an interview like this. While my boss is trying to point fingers at me for failing to notify anyone, the safety inspector acting as maintenance boss points out that clearly, there's enough evidence of policy in place that the process is flawed and that he should take that as an out for him and me both. They end up having this huge investigation, but in the end, they come down to the conclusion that I didn't do anything wrong and was just following orders, as I'd said. So, to save $2 in overtime, they let a few $1,000s worth of inventory go to waste. As far as I could tell, after I reported the problem the first time, no one said or did anything more about it, and even less the second time. Whatever was wrong with that freezer was going to take 2 months to fix for whatever reason, so they had to rent a refrigerated tractor trailer, which I was told cost them $100 a day to lease. If that's true, the mishap ended up costing somewhere around $10,000. I don't know if the repairs and trailer rental could have been avoided, but the lost inventory definitely could have been avoided. With the first incident behind me, or so I thought, we had someone on the early shift who quit. They needed someone to move from the afternoon shift, 11 to 7, to the morning shift, 4 to 12. Guess who they picked? I was told it was because I was the most junior person, but that didn't make sense because they'd hired another person after me and she was still there. I felt like it was punishment, but at the same time, I kind of wanted to be on the morning shift, so I kept my mouth shut and took that shift as told. My popularity with the boss didn't improve any. For one thing, any time I'd request a day off, he'd reject it. At first, it would be for reasons like, sorry, that's not enough notice, but I would sometimes tell him 3 or 4 months in advance and they would always be refused. This also applied to holidays. Since we needed both shifts to work every single day, including all major holidays, not everyone could take holidays off. So I got stuck being on duty when it was a holiday, but I could bank my holiday and would be told that I could use that holiday later on a day of my own choosing, which meant never, because my boss wouldn't approve them. When I got on the morning shift, we were short a man on the afternoon shift because I had gone to that morning shift. This was okay for a while. In typical corporate fashion, they didn't even post a job opening for a few weeks, so after a while, the afternoon shift was getting pretty ragged from doing all their work with a man absent. Typically, what would always happen in the past was that the boss would ask someone from the early shift to pull a double and would work an extra 7 hours. This was pretty rare because of the no overtime rule. One day, the boss calls me into his office just before noon. He tells me, I need you to pull a double today. The second shift could really use the extra help. Okay, I said. As little as I made, I appreciated the overtime, but at the same time, this just made me feel used and abused, which kind of annoyed me. I couldn't take time off, not even on holidays, and as cheap as the company was, they were saving a ton of money by not hiring a third person for that shift but would burn out the existing employees for a few extra bucks. Then, I thought about it a little bit more and said, wait, I've worked 8 hours already. If I work till 7, that will give me. I counted it up on my fingers just for dramatic effect, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 7 hours of overtime for the day. I'm authorizing the overtime, my boss said. Okay, I said, then turned to leave and stopped again. Wait, authorizing it as in, my paycheck will reflect 7 additional hours at time and a half, or authorizing it as in, when I get here tomorrow morning, I'll work an hour and you're going to send me home because I'm 7 hours ahead on my time card? 7 extra hours on your paycheck, he said. At time and a half? I asked. Yes. He said. Okay, I said, then turned again, but then turned right back. Hey, wait a minute. You almost had me there. What are you talking about? My boss asked. That was pretty good. I said, wagging a finger at him. I almost fell for it, too. What? He looked at me like I was crazy, and maybe I was. This is like some expert level Simon Says, I said. What are you on about? He asked me. You almost got me. I said. It's a trap. I looked at the wall where some of the notices were posted. Here it is. I pointed to a paper that had the no overtime rule on it. It even had my signature on it, along with the other employees. Right here. No overtime and 48-hour prior approval, and here it is. Absolutely no exceptions. You almost had me with that one. Could you imagine? If I worked overtime, I wouldn't get paid because right now, here, today, this isn't 48 hours in advance of a few minutes from now. I smiled triumphantly at the boss and left his office and didn't do the overtime. I thought I was pretty slick. The next time it happened, my boss caught me in the hallway and said he needed me to work a double today. I nodded, then responded with, "Hey, wait a minute. Do you mean today's today as in right now? You know I can't do that." I shrugged my shoulders. "You know, policy. No exceptions." He looked at me like I had two heads and walked off. I pulled this a few times on him and I felt justified in doing so. I know I was pushing it, but damn, you can't say, "No exceptions," then claim an exception. I figure I could have been fired over not doing it, but at the same time, I figured I could also find another job without much difficulty. When I got moved to the morning shift, I had gotten a part-time job in the afternoons that paid enough to make it worth my time. Also, I'd already interviewed with a few places, and with the responses I was getting, I figured I wouldn't be out of work very long if I did get fired, whether it would have been legal to fire me or not. Working the morning shift had given me plenty of time to interview in the afternoons. So, because they were so mad about getting 15 minutes of overtime and acting like it was all my fault, I threw their words back at them and refused to do the OT because it has to be a 48-hour prior approval. In the long run, I like to think it hurt them more than it hurt me. Epilogue. Not too long after this all started, I was in my boss's office at one point and there was another department head in there, which at first didn't seem at all suspicious, but this other department head says he has an opening and he wants me to apply for it. My boss is singing my praises and says all the regular catchphrases like, "Great opportunity for you," and "Sure would hate to lose you, but," and all that. I get it. It's not lost on me that my boss thinks he can get rid of me by having me be promoted into another department. He even wrote a recommendation about me to the big boss and helped me get selected as the WorkWise Employee of the Month, which was a monthly thing for safety-conscious employees. When I was selected, I got a certificate and a reserved parking spot for a month. So, I applied for that other position. This other department head even reviews my application with me and helps me update my resume, so when the big boss does the interviews, I end up getting the job. The other helpful factor was that I had only a high school diploma and they normally wanted someone with a degree, which would seem to be a liability, but because of how cheap this company was, they saw this as an opportunity. He doesn't have a degree, so we'll lowball him and he'll take it. And that's exactly what they did, and they were right. The department head told me how much the position was supposed to pay and the big boss offered me $2,000 below that, which was still a huge pay increase for me. I took a new job. It was a piece of cake. It was a Monday to Friday job. It was salaried. I no longer worked weekends. I no longer worked overtime. I no longer worked from 4 to noon. After I took the job, I would run into my boss from time to time and he had this attitude like he was happy for having gotten rid of me. I don't think he knew I got a raise, or if he did, that didn't seem to bother him. He was rid of me and he was happy about that. In my new job, I was an instructor. I was all of 23 years old and mostly unqualified. I had to apply to something called a deficiency program to meet the state's requirement to do it. I had 2 sessions per day, 5 days per week. The company got paid for each person I trained in each session. From what I understand, this was decent money. I would typically have 20 students in each session. If the company was paid $50 per student, that would be $1,000 for each session, or $2,000 per days they were making. Not bad for the company and good for me, because the position was hard to fill at what they were willing to pay and I was below that, so everybody was a winner, except my part-time job, but that was okay. The position had even gone vacant for over a year before they asked me to fill it. Not long after I started, the department head, who brought me on, left and was replaced by another. This was a woman, who everyone had already known about, and she was known for being real though, who didn't take any crap and was, at least supposedly, hard to get along with and hard to work for. I figured I wouldn't last too long with this new boss if the rumors were true, and right off, she was butting heads with several of her employees because, like any new boss, she made the changes she thought needed to be made. I didn't have any problems with her and I tried not to give her any reason to have a problem with me. One time, I get called into her office and I'm wondering what it's about. She tells me how she got a call from Human Resources about me and we needed to do some things, and fast. Not long before this, there had been a kind of a big story in the news about a nearby city, where the police and fire departments had to pay out retirees some huge amounts of money for vacation and holidays they'd been banking over the years. The punchline to the news story was how some fire chief had over a year of vacation saved up, some of it dating back to when he was a rookie. Now, the city had to pay him his current wage for a benefit that was only a few bucks when it was earned but now was worth a whole lot more. The boss lady tells me how Human Resources is concerned that this was what I was trying to do. The idea never crossed my mind. For one thing, I didn't plan to stick around that long. Then, I got to thinking about it. In my old position, they didn't like to let me take a vacation and kept me from taking holidays. My requests never even made it to human resources or payroll or anywhere else, so it looked like I just didn't like taking a vacation because my previous boss wouldn't even process my requests. By this time, I had banked 3 weeks of vacation and about as much in holidays, so about 6 weeks of time, all earned at my previous rate, but that I would get to take at my new higher rate. So, the boss lady tells me that she needs me to come up with a plan for how I intend to get rid of my vacation and holiday time in a reasonable manner. I came up with a plan, where I would take every Friday off for the next however many weeks it took to get down to whatever was acceptable to her or human resources or whomever. When I told her of my plan, she laughed and said something like, "I guess you just want to work part-time from now on, don't you?" When I smiled, she tells me, "I didn't know you had teeth." I told her I didn't know what she meant, so she told me she'd never seen me smile before, which made me realize I was way too serious around her, expecting her to be too serious, and that those rumors about her were unfounded. She was just a no-crap kind of person. Before I ran out of vacation and holiday time, I decided I was going to quit that crappy job to go do something else. I still had something like 3 weeks worth of time off to use up, so I figured, based on company policy, that I would just put in my notice, continue to work, and then get a fat check at the end of it all, like a severance. My boss was always straight with me, so I told her my plan, even though I knew this might put me in jeopardy of being told my services were no longer needed and I'd be out of a job earlier than I planned. The boss lady told me she appreciated me telling her, partly because of how difficult it would be to find someone qualified and cheap enough to replace me. When I put in my official notice, I got called down to human resources again. The lady acted like she always did, like I was trying to get one over on everyone. She tells me there's no way in hell I'm working up until the last day of my employment because that would mean the company would have to pay my salary for that time and pay me out for my vacation and holiday time. She tells me, instead, what they're going to do is have me work every day up until I hit the point that I have an equal number of vacation days and work days left, and then I was just going on vacation until my final day. That way, they don't have to pay me out when I leave. I point out to her that this means I would be leaving 3 weeks early, and if they didn't replace me, that means the company would lose the revenues they would have generated by having me continue to work, and those revenues would more than offset the amount they were paying me, probably by a 10-to-1 margin. She's not buying it. She tells me if I don't like it, I can go talk to the big boss. I give it some thought and realize I can either take it her way and get 3 weeks off and quit working in this crappy place 3 weeks early, or I could go try to convince the big boss that I could do better to make the company a whole lot of money. The deciding factor was realizing that all I would be doing was helping someone who had screwed me out of $2,000 because he knew I had no bargaining power in his contract of adhesion. So, I said, screw it. Let's do it your way. She tells me I have to withdraw my form and submit a new one, saying I'm requesting to take a vacation during that time. I tell her, no. She asks me why not. I tell her it's because I've made my request and I'm not going to do her job for her. If she rejects my request, there's the form. She can write on there that she's rejecting it and put down what she wants her official response to be. This makes her mad, but it makes me happy. I really didn't care. I would have written the request, but I was annoyed by it all. I did the rough math on some of this. This was a company that refused to supply basic things like pens and paper and also didn't want me to get even $2 in overtime. They didn't want me to get any vacation or holidays and made me bank them. Then, they decided, hey, wait a minute. I think this guy is trying to stiff us. So, they were forcing me to take my built-up balance of holiday and vacation time, but at the same time, every day I took off meant a loss of revenues of at least $2,000, which was way far in excess of anything I could ever make in wages at this place. Then, when I said I would just continue to work and earn them money, but that they would have to pay me for my vacation time, they shot themselves in the foot by telling me I had to quit working earlier and take my vacation at the end of my employment rather than work till the end and cash out. Between lost inventory, additional wages, and lost revenues, their penny pinching must have cost them $60,000, just in trying to keep me from earning money. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel for more content. Let me know what you think about the stories in the comment section below. Have a great day. Bye bye.